Helen Davenport had buried her husband 6 weeks ago under a weeping sky, the kind that didn't just drizzle, but mourned with her. The whole town came out for Gerald's service. Neighbors from both sides of the block, former students who still called her Mrs. D, even the mayor. The man was respected, charismatic. Everyone said he was a pillar. Helen had agreed for decades. But now, alone in her modest white bungalow, with its creaky porch swing and garden hedges she no longer bothered to trim, Helen couldn't shake a feeling. Something underneath the grief was rotting. She hadn't told anyone about the letter from Loretta. Not her daughter Melissa, not even her oldest friend Clara, who dropped off casseroles and always overwatered Helen's violets. The letter had arrived in a plain envelope, postmarked from Asheville. "I don't mean to disturb your grief, Mrs. Davenport, but your husband said things a man only says when he knows he's running out of time. I believe you deserve to know what I heard. If you'd like to talk, I'll be in town until the 12th. Helen reread it every night. It was the 8th now. That morning, she found herself in Gerald's study, a room he had kept neat to the point of obsession, his books organized by subject and date, his drawers locked unless he needed something. He used to joke, "You have the house, I'll have this cave." And she'd laugh. But today it felt less like a joke, more like a fortress she hadn't been allowed inside. Behind a row of dusty paperbacks, she found a narrow wooden box. Inside it, nestled beside a faded photograph of a woman Helen didn't recognize, was a phone, older model, not Gerald's usual style, with a cracked screen and no password. The battery was nearly dead. When she plugged it in, the first thing she saw was a message. It read, "You promised? You said you'd tell her. I won't keep this secret forever." Helen stared at the screen as her breath caught in her throat. She recognized the sender's name, but not from her life. The phone screen stayed dim for a long second before lighting up again. The name on the message, Dina Cartwright. Helen repeated it aloud, as if saying it might unlock a memory. It didn't. The surname was unfamiliar, clipped and cold. She flipped the photo over. On the back, in Gerald's handwriting, it read only, "Summer 1997, Waverly." That was the year Melissa turned 10. They had taken a trip to Myrtle Beach that summer, just the three of them. Gerald said work was too busy for longer vacations. But the word Waverly didn't fit into that puzzle at all. Helen sat down at the kitchen table, heart thudding, the phone beside the photo like two pieces of someone else's life. For a man who'd prided himself on transparency, who balanced the checkbook with the same thoroughness he used to inspect the roof before hurricane season, it didn't add up. Gerald never lied. Or, she had always believed he hadn't. She opened the phone's message history. Most threads were blank or deleted, except for two. One was with Dina. The other was a string of voicemails from an unlisted number, each marked not transcribed. She pressed play on the oldest. "I told you I wouldn't protect you forever, Gerald. She deserves to know. You don't get to die and leave it all on me." The voice was a woman's, middle-aged, sharp, and tired. It wasn't Loretta. Helen was sure of that. The second voicemail was even shorter. "She's not a child anymore. Tell her, or I will." Helen stopped the message, trembling. Who wasn't a child anymore? Melissa? As she stared at the screen, the contact picture for Dina changed. It loaded a linked email account tied to cloud storage. And there, tucked beneath files labeled with nothing more than numbers and dates, was a document titled Affidavit, Custodial Agreement, March 2000. Her fingers shook as she opened the file. The document was real, notarized, dated, and her husband's signature was at the bottom. So was Dina Cartwright's. And so was a name Helen had never seen before. Rachel Cartwright Davenport. Davenport. Helen's blood ran cold. She checked the file again. Custodial agreement. A child born March 2000. Her husband's child. A second family. A daughter. Helen staggered back from the table, gripping the counter. Outside, the sun was beginning to sink behind the trees, long shadows spilling across the yard like fingers reaching toward her windows. She had buried her husband thinking she knew him. But somewhere, 25 years ago, he had divided his life cleanly in two, one part for her and another entirely hidden. And now it was unraveling, thread by thread, each one cutting deeper than the last. Helen hadn't slept. The affidavit kept playing in her mind like a warped film reel. Gerald's signature beside another woman's, the proof of a child, a secret, a life he chose to hide from her for 25 years. By morning, she'd packed her old leather handbag and called a car to take her to the assisted living complex on the far side of Asheville. That was where Loretta's letter said she'd be staying. Helen wasn't sure what she expected. Apologies, maybe, or details to help stitch together a narrative she could understand. But when she knocked on the pale blue door of Unit 3C, what she got was a woman with eyes too tired to lie. Loretta was in her 60s, with short, steely gray hair and a voice hardened by years of witnessing death. But when she saw Helen, something in her expression softened. "I figured you'd come," she said, stepping aside. "Gerald said you would, eventually." Helen sat on a stiff couch while Loretta poured tea without asking how she liked it. Everything in the apartment smelled faintly of mint and disinfectant. "He talked more those last 2 weeks than he probably did in your entire marriage," Loretta began. "I don't say that to hurt you, but it's the truth. Dying makes people talk, even liars." Helen didn't flinch. "How long did you know about Dina?" "Not long. He only said her name twice. The first time, it was through tears. The second, it was through gritted teeth. Said she was his biggest mistake and his greatest shame. Said she ruined him, but not how you think." Loretta handed Helen a worn journal. "He asked me to burn it. I didn't." Helen stared at the leather-bound cover. "Why?" "Because if my husband had been living a lie, I'd want someone to leave me the truth." She opened the journal. The first entry was dated 1996. Gerald had written about meeting Dina at a fundraiser, how she was like fire in a dark room. She was married at the time. So was he. The affair began within weeks. Helen's stomach twisted. It had lasted 4 years. The final entries were brief and frenzied. Gerald wrote of Dina threatening to go public, about a child he hadn't meant to create, but eventually came to care for. And then, one line that made Helen's hands go numb. "I paid her every year, quietly, enough to keep her in Waverly and out of my life. But now Rachel is grown, and Dina says she wants to meet Melissa. I won't allow it. I won't lose the family I built over the family I ruined." Helen closed the journal, trembling. He hadn't just lied. He had bought silence. And now the cost was coming due. Helen returned home just after dusk. Her fingers ached from gripping the steering wheel too tight, her mind dull and stinging like a fresh bruise. She hadn't spoken a word during the 2-hour drive from Asheville. The journal sat on the passenger seat, wrapped in a worn dish towel, as if shielding it from daylight, or from her. The house, too, had changed. It felt smaller. Not because anything was different, but because everything was. She poured herself a glass of wine, cheap, dry, and too cold, and stood in the middle of the kitchen, trying to remember the last time she'd felt peace here. Not contentment, not routine, real peace. The silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening. Melissa. Her daughter's voice followed. "Mom, your car wasn't in the driveway, She paused when she stepped into the kitchen. "What's wrong?" Helen opened her mouth, closed it. She looked at Melissa, 36, independent, a lawyer now in Charlotte. She looked so much like Gerald when she was angry, but in moments like this, with her eyebrows furrowed in concern, she looked only like herself. Innocent, unaware. "There's something I need to tell you," Helen said, her voice cracking. She didn't hand her the journal, not yet. Instead, she walked to the table and picked up the photograph of Dina, the one she'd first found with the burner phone. "Do you know this woman?" Melissa frowned. "No, who is she?" Helen sat down. "Her name is Dina Cartwright. She had a relationship with your father." Melissa blinked. "Like, before you two met?" Helen shook her head slowly. Then, quietly, "You have a half-sister. Her name is Rachel. She's 25. The words hung in the room like fog, thick, unshakable. Melissa didn't speak. Her face hardened in slow motion, emotion moving behind her eyes like clouds before a storm. "That's not funny." "It's not a joke," Helen said. "I have proof. Gerald wrote it all down. She was born in 2000. He kept them a secret for 25 years. Melissa stood frozen, a tremor in her jaw. Does anyone else know? Loretta does, the hospice nurse. She gave me his journal. Melissa turned away, her arms tight around her stomach. So while he was driving me to school, showing up at my graduations, he had another kid out there? Helen couldn't answer. She had no language for betrayal this big. After several long minutes, Melissa asked flatly, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to find them," Helen said. "Dina, Rachel. I need to know who they are, what they want, and if they plan to take anything more from us." Melissa didn't respond. She picked up the photograph, studied it, then set it back down. "If you go after them, you better be ready, because this isn't going to go away once you knock on that door." Helen nodded, the weight of it all settling on her shoulders. "I'm not just knocking," she said. "I'm kicking it in." 3 days later, Helen sat in the Waverly County Records office, thumbing through old property files with the determination of a woman who'd been lied to long enough. She'd called in a favor from a former colleague who still had friends in public records. It didn't take long to find the name. Dina Cartwright had bought a modest ranch-style home on Meadow Ridge Lane in 2001, barely a year after Rachel's birth. Paid in full. No mortgage. Helen narrowed her eyes. "Paid with what, Gerald?" she whispered under her breath. A few pages deeper, she found what she was looking for, a quiet, recurring wire transfer from a Shell Trust account, one that bore the name Hampton Pines Holdings. Gerald's name didn't appear anywhere, but the address on the account matched a post office box he'd rented for years, one Helen had never questioned. The payments had continued every year, like clockwork, until the year he died. Helen felt the room tilt slightly. She steadied herself. He hadn't just hidden a daughter. He'd funded a second life. She drove to Meadow Ridge Lane without stopping. Waverly was a smaller town than she remembered from passing through years ago, quiet, filled with single-story homes, gravel driveways, rusted mailboxes. The air smelled of pine and cut grass. It wasn't the kind of place where people had the luxury of secrets, but apparently Gerald had found a way. The house at 412 Meadow Ridge was white with faded green shutters. A swing hung from a crooked oak in the front yard. The grass was uneven, lived in but cared for. Helen parked across the street and watched. After 15 minutes, the front door opened. A young woman stepped out onto the porch, slender, tall, light brown hair pulled into a messy bun. She wore scrubs, the kind nurses wear after a shift, and carried a to-go coffee cup in one hand, phone in the other. Helen's breath caught. She looked exactly like Gerald. She didn't need a DNA test. That was Rachel. The young woman stepped off the porch and unlocked her car. Before she got in, she looked across the street, her eyes landing on Helen's car. They locked eyes for a second, only a second, but something flickered in Rachel's face. Recognition? Or just polite curiosity? Rachel drove off, and Helen finally exhaled. She hadn't been ready to speak. Not yet. But now she knew where they were. And she would be back. That evening, Helen returned home to a message blinking on her landline. Melissa's voice crackled through the speaker. "I've been digging. Dad didn't just set up a trust fund. He set up two. One of them started draining our college account 5 years ago. Mom, he took from me. From us. What else don't we know?" Helen sat in silence, her jaw tightening. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The next morning, Helen was waiting outside 412 Meadow Ridge before the sun had fully risen. Fog clung low to the ground, curling around her tires like smoke. The world felt quiet in the way it only does before something changes. This time, she didn't stay in the car. She walked up the cracked walkway, heart hammering. The front yard was still damp with dew, and her shoes soaked through before she reached the porch. She hesitated only once before knocking. A minute passed. Then the door opened. Dina Cartwright hadn't aged gracefully, but she had aged honestly. Her face was sharper than in the photo, lines etched deep, eyes dulled but alert. She wore a navy robe and held a steaming mug that read, "Nurses make it better." The irony made Helen clench her jaw. "Can I help you?" Dina asked, voice cautious but not surprised. "Yes," Helen said. "You know who I am." Dina didn't deny it. She stepped aside. Inside, the house was clean but lived in. Modest. A bookshelf sagged under medical journals and framed certificates. On the mantel was a picture of Rachel in graduation robes, Duke University, nursing. Another frame showed her as a child, holding hands with a man cropped conveniently out. "You came alone," Dina said, sitting. "I thought you might bring the daughter." Helen sat across from her. "She knows everything." Dina took a long sip of coffee. "Then I imagine you're here for blood." "I'm here for the truth," Helen said. "All of it. No more hiding." Dina leaned back, face unreadable. "Gerald promised this day would never come. That's the only promise he ever kept. To me. He paid you off." "Yes, because he was too much of a coward to face you. Or her. He told me she was a mistake. Said loving her made him hate himself. But he still sent the checks, didn't he? I didn't demand them. He insisted. His guilt had a price tag." Helen opened her bag and pulled out the journal. Dina's expression didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the coffee mug. "Then why now?" Helen asked. "Why start sending messages? Why threaten to tell me?" "Because he was dying," Dina said, her voice lower now. "And Rachel, she wanted answers. I never told her the whole truth. She always thought Gerald left because of you, that you pushed him out. But when he got sick, he refused to see her, wouldn't even return her letters." Helen blinked. "Letters?" "Dozens. Begging for 10 minutes, a call, anything. He ignored everyone. She doesn't even know he's dead. I didn't have the heart to tell her." Silence fell, thick, unforgiving. Helen looked around. "So what do you want now?" Dina's laugh was short, humorless. "Nothing. We never wanted your money, your house, your sympathy. But Rachel deserves the truth, from someone. So tell her, if you want. Or let her go on thinking you're the reason her father disappeared. Either way, I'm done cleaning up his mess." Helen rose, her voice steady. "No, now I clean it up, and she'll hear the truth, from me." Dina nodded once, slowly. "Then you'd better be careful. She's not the only one with a temper." Rachel Cartwright's nursing shift ended at 4 p.m., and Helen was waiting by the side entrance of the outpatient clinic before the sun began to drop behind the cypress trees. She watched as Rachel exited the building, her hair pulled back tight, and her name badge clipped to her pocket. There was a tired grace in the way she moved, steady, alert, familiar. Gerald used to walk that same way when he thought no one was watching. Helen stepped forward. "Rachel?" Rachel paused and turned slowly. "Yes?" Helen's voice caught, but she pressed on. "My name is Helen Davenport. I was Gerald's wife." Rachel didn't flinch, but her eyes narrowed. "I know who you are. Can we talk?" "Why now?" Rachel asked. "Why after all this time?" Helen's throat tightened. "Because your father is dead." Rachel didn't speak. For a moment she didn't even breathe. Her shoulders stiffened, and her gaze dropped to the ground. Then she looked up again, not with tears, but with ice. "When?" 6 weeks ago. He was in hospice care. He didn't tell anyone." Rachel crossed her arms. "Of course he didn't." Helen tried to explain. "He didn't respond to your letters. I know that. I read them. After. I found them. I know you deserved better." Rachel stared, her jaw clenched. "And what? You're here to make peace now? To what? Clean up the wreckage? Why didn't you tell me he was dying?" "I didn't know about you," Helen said, her voice almost a whisper. "Not until after. He kept you hidden from us. Me, Melissa. I only found out because of the journal. And a second phone. All of it was buried. Just like he wanted." Rachel's expression flickered, the first crack in the shell. "He made it sound like you forced him out, like you threatened to ruin him." "No," Helen said. "He made choices, every one of them. And he let you grow up thinking I was the villain because it was easier than facing the truth." Rachel looked away, her voice suddenly quieter. "He sent money, birthdays, school. I always thought it was guilt. I thought maybe that meant he cared." Helen didn't reply immediately. Then, "He wrote about you. He said he cared, but he was ashamed and cowardly." Rachel blinked hard. "I don't want your pity." I'm not here to give it. I came to tell you the truth, and because, whether you believe it or not, you're part of my story now." The two women stood there in silence, the clinic's lights humming faintly behind them. Then Rachel asked, "Does Melissa know?" "Yes." "Does she hate me?" "She's angry, not at you, at him, at what he did to all of us." Rachel nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. "I'm not ready to talk to her." "I understand." Helen reached into her bag and handed Rachel a small envelope. Inside was a photo from Gerald's journal, an image of Rachel as a baby, curled in her father's arms, the only one Helen had found where he looked truly vulnerable. Rachel stared at it for a long time. "I don't forgive him," she said softly. "I don't think I ever will." "You don't have to," Helen replied, "but don't let him decide who you are." Rachel pocketed the photo. Then, for the first time, she looked Helen in the eye with something gentler than suspicion. "I'll call you," she said. "Just, not yet." Helen nodded. "Take your time. We've lost enough years already." Rachel turned and walked to her car. Helen stood alone under the fading sky. The silence now felt different, not empty, just waiting. Helen waited 2 days before telling Melissa. They met at a quiet diner on the edge of town, a place where no one asked questions, and the waitress brought your coffee without needing to ask how you liked it. Melissa sat across from her, arms crossed tight, barely touching her eggs. "You what?" she asked, keeping her voice low but seething. "I spoke with Rachel," Helen said calmly. "She didn't even know he was gone, Melissa." "And that's my problem?" Melissa snapped. "Dad lies to everyone, funds a secret family, ruins our finances, and now we're just supposed to sit around making peace with his other daughter? She's not the one who betrayed you." "I know that," Melissa hissed. "I know. That's what makes it worse." Helen placed the photograph on the table between them. Rachel as a baby, curled in Gerald's arms, looking into a face that had once held the same tenderness Melissa remembered. Melissa stared at it. For a moment, her jaw tightened, but then her eyes softened. "She looks like me," she muttered. "She looks like him." They drank in silence. Eventually, Melissa asked, "What does she want?" "Nothing. She didn't ask for money. Didn't even want to talk. She was lied to, too, you know. Told I was the reason he left, that I forced him to walk away." "She really believed that?" Helen nodded. Melissa exhaled. "So what now? You and Rachel start sewing pillows and drinking tea while I just forget everything Dad did to me?" "No," Helen said quietly. "But maybe you don't have to carry his damage anymore. Maybe neither of us do." Melissa looked away, her expression guarded. "I'm not ready." I told her that. She understood. The waitress refilled their coffee. For a while, neither said anything. Then Melissa said something that surprised even herself. "I don't hate her." Helen looked up. Melissa continued, slower this time. "I don't know if I can forgive her either, but she didn't ask to be born into this. Neither did I." Helen reached across the table, placing her hand gently on her daughter's. "Your father made sure we were always divided. Maybe we don't let him win at that, too." Melissa nodded faintly. "So, what now?" Helen thought for a long moment. "I want to see what else he left behind. There are accounts, Melissa. 2 trusts. That property in Waverly didn't buy itself. There's more buried in his name, and I want to know if any of it is mine, or yours." "You're thinking of going after it legally?" "I'm thinking of finishing what he tried to keep buried." Melissa picked up the photo again, her lips pressed into a thin, uncertain line. "If Rachel ever wants to meet, I'll listen, but I won't smile through it." "You don't have to," Helen said. "Just showing up would be enough." Melissa placed the photo in her purse. Neither of them finished their food. But it was the first time in weeks they left a table without looking over their shoulders. Helen sat at the kitchen table again, Gerald's journal to her left, her laptop open, legal pads stacked beside a steaming cup of weak coffee. The last few days had passed in a blur of emails, online forms, and endless automated phone lines. She had started tracing the wire transfers and shell accounts through every lead Gerald left behind. She was careful, methodical. She kept notes. It was during a phone call with Gerald's former accountant's office that she found the crack. "Sorry," said the receptionist. We can't release financial details to you without power of attorney, unless you're the executor? I am, Helen said. There was a pause. That's strange, the woman replied. According to our records, the named executor is Rachel Cartwright Davenport. Helen's blood ran cold. What did you say? The woman hesitated. That's what's listed on Mr. Davenport's personal file, a revised document filed last March. I'm looking at it now. Helen ended the call quietly, thanked the woman, and stared at the wall for several long minutes. He didn't just lie. He didn't just hide her. He had gone further. Rachel wasn't just a daughter he abandoned. She was the one he chose to carry his legacy. Helen felt the sting creep up her spine. He had changed his will and never told her. Never told Melissa. She called Melissa immediately. He made her the executor? Melissa said after a long silence. Yes. And left you with what? Memories and tax debt? I don't know yet. Well, that changes everything. Melissa's voice wasn't angry. It was focused, sharp. She was already thinking like a lawyer. That evening, Helen opened the last drawer of Gerald's desk, a drawer she had avoided. It stuck slightly, and inside was a leather folder she didn't recognize. Inside it, she found a bundle of printouts, bank transfers, real estate deeds in a name she didn't know, and one long email thread between Gerald and a man named Richard Voss. The name didn't ring a bell, but the content of the emails stopped her breath. They weren't just about money, they were about offshore investments. Helen sat back in her chair. Gerald had been hiding money internationally, moving assets in and out of LLCs that Helen never knew existed, and at the bottom of the file was a typed letter. Should anything happen to me, Rachel will know where to find everything. She deserves it, more than anyone. It was signed, G. Davenport. Suddenly, a noise, paper sliding under the door. Helen froze. She walked across the room and picked it up. It was a small envelope, no return address. Inside was a single scrap of paper with one sentence. Stop digging. Her pulse spiked. This wasn't over, and someone didn't want her to know what her husband had really done. Helen stood in the long, sterile hallway of the law offices of Dorsey and Morgan, the folder of documents clutched in her hand. Melissa stood beside her, dressed in charcoal gray and armed with a hard gaze. They were waiting to meet with a probate attorney, someone Melissa had found through a colleague who owed her a favor. Inside the conference room, the attorney, an older man with weathered glasses and deliberate speech, studied the documents Helen handed over. The revised will, the shell company information, the emails with Richard Voss, and most damning of all, the paper trail of financial transfers leading to accounts registered in Belize and the Cayman Islands. Gerald Davenport, the attorney said, was engaged in financial activity that would not withstand scrutiny. These are clear violations of disclosure and likely tax evasion. If Rachel is named executor and knowingly withholds any of this, she could be in real trouble. Melissa leaned forward. Could we contest the will? Yes, but it will take time, money, and disclosure of all financial documentation, which she legally must provide. And if she refuses... Then we escalate, Melissa said. Helen stayed quiet. Her mind wasn't on legal tactics. It was on the envelope, the note. Someone else knew what Gerald was doing. Later that afternoon, Helen called Rachel. For hours, the call went unanswered. But then, just before sundown, her phone lit up with a message. Rachel, I know about Voss. Meet me tomorrow. No lawyers, no lies. The next morning, they met at a coffee shop just off the interstate. Rachel looked different, firmer. She was no longer just a grieving daughter. She was someone protecting something. I didn't know, Rachel began. Not at first. He didn't tell me anything when I was growing up. But a few months before he died, he got scared. He said people would come looking after he was gone. Said I'd need to be ready, that I was the only one he could trust. Who is Voss? Rachel hesitated. He's a fixer. Helped Dad move money offshore. I only found out after Dad died. Voss showed up at my job, said I needed to keep everything in place, keep it quiet. Did he send the note? Rachel shook her head. He doesn't threaten. He implies. Helen leaned in. Rachel, this money wasn't just hidden. It was stolen. From me. From Melissa. You're the executor of a fraudulent estate. If you don't come forward, you're complicit. Rachel's eyes filled, not with tears, but with something harder. Do you think I wanted any of this? He made me believe he was doing it for me, for the future. I didn't ask for your house. I didn't ask to be his secret. Helen exhaled. Then help me fix it. There was a long silence. Finally, Rachel nodded. I'll give your attorney everything, files, passwords, everything I've got. But on one condition. What? You don't let this turn into revenge, for any of us. Helen blinked. This started as survival. Then let it end as peace. 2 weeks later, the court accepted Helen's petition to have Gerald's will re-examined under fraud. Melissa filed a civil suit to recover stolen assets. Rachel submitted a full affidavit, and with it, the keys to the hidden accounts. Richard Voss disappeared. No one could find him. But the money was traced and the estate divided, legally. Melissa declined most of her portion. She set up a scholarship fund in her father's name, under one condition: it would carry her mother's name beside it. Helen didn't speak at the hearing. She didn't need to. Gerald Davenport lost everything the moment he chose to bury the truth beneath a second life. Helen had lost too. But what remained was hers to rebuild.